All right, this is going on page 96 when we're done. So yesterday we had law of sines. Today we're going to talk about the law of cosines. And just like the other, I could show you where this comes from. I think that we might get lost. This time we don't know what the height is. We can draw in the height, and then we could, by doing some Pythagorean theorem and some substitution with cosines, we come up with the law of cosines. So that's where it comes from. There is a proof that you could go watch a video on Khan Academy if you wanted to that show it. It's not that bad, but I just don't want to take the time and lose you in that. Just know that it's coming from the Pythagorean theorem, and by finding the cosine of this angle and you do some substitution and it all works out. You have there's really just one version. Well, there's two versions of the formula, but you can write it out 6 different ways depending on which side lengths you have, calling them A, B, and C. But on most problems, they're not labeled A, B, and C anyway, so it doesn't matter. The main thing you want to know for this is that for law of cosines, you're using it if you have side angle side or side side side. And if you know that you're using it in a side angle side situation, then getting all the letters and stuff in the right place, it just comes naturally. It's not that bad at all. So you'll see how it looks a lot like the Pythagorean theorem. So here's one version of it. A squared equals, okay? So whatever you have by itself squared on one side, so this little a squared, so this side length a corresponds to this angle. So if this is what's outside by itself on the equal sign, this is the angle that you're going to be using in there, because you're only using one angle at a time. So I'm looking for A, and that means I have to know B and C and this angle. So A squared equals B squared plus C squared, okay, which is not exactly what the Pythagorean theorem looks like, but it's very similar, right? Minus 2, and then these two that you have in here, you multiply them together, B times C times the cosine of angle A. So one of the sides squared equals the other two sides squared and added together, minus 2 times those two sides multiplied together times the cosine of the angle that corresponds to that side. Okay, so it looks kind of yucky, but it's really not that bad. So we can write a version for B. So if this is B squared, and let's say this is B I need, this is going to be A squared plus C squared minus 2 times A times C times the cosine of angle B. You see how that works? It's the law of cosines. Okay. And so then we could do C, and that's going to be equal to A squared plus B squared minus 2 times A times B times the cosine of C. So do you see how they're the same thing? Like, because especially if they're not even labeled here, you're just using the sides and the angle, and that's it. Okay? Everybody okay with all that? So once again, this says to the nearest tenth, so we're going to go with what it says. And your assignment may say that. I may have forgotten to change on the assignment. I might have changed it. So you got to make sure you're reading what it says. So if I want to find the side length, and I can't use the law of sines, because the law of sines, I could use this angle and this side, but I would have to have this side and another angle, and I don't have that, right? So since what I have is this side, angle, side, that's why I'm using the law of cosines, okay? So this is the side that I'm looking for, okay? And it's across from that angle. I got to know one of those two things. I either got to know the side or the angle. I know the angle. So that means I put x squared out here. That's equal to the other two sides, so 16 squared plus 28 squared. Those two sides squared and added together, minus 2 times those two numbers multiplied together, 16 times 28, times the cosine of that angle, which is 127. And then with these nifty calculators, you can type all this in. You can do one of two things. You can type all this in and then take the square root of the answer, or what you really want, since this is x squared, you want the square root of all that, so you could just type it all in under the square root. That's what I would do, so just so we, whoops. And it's nice that you can actually see, you know, what you're doing. Maybe this will lighten up some. Okay, so I would do the square root, because it'll, and if you're using a calculator where the square root doesn't grow with you, then you just have to make sure you use parentheses. So 16 squared plus 28 squared minus 2 times 16 times 28 times the cosine of 127. You have to make sure if you're going to use the big old square root that you have to close those parentheses. And you can arrow over and double check, you know, that you typed it all in right. You hit equals, and there's your answer. Another option is to type in, like, let's say you forgot to hit the square root, or you're using a calculator where it's not that easy. So 16 squared plus 28 squared minus 2 times 16 times 28 times the cosine of 127. So if I do that, I didn't put it under the square root, so I have that number. Now I could just hit square root of the answer, and then I get the same answer either way. So it's just a matter of whatever you would prefer to do. Just make sure that you've actually taken the square root in some form or fashion. So to the nearest tenth then, x is going to be equal to 39.7 inches. Good, and our units are very important. Right? Any questions at all? 96. All right, so let's look at number 3. So we don't have a picture, so we need to draw one. I'll draw it out here so we have more room to. All right, so I'm going to draw my picture. Got triangle ABC. I'm not really worried about it being drawn to scale or anything. Angle C is 88. AC is 22 feet. BC is 11.5 feet. And I want to find the length of AB, so we can call that X. Okay? Everybody okay with that? But it's actually, we could call it C also because it's little c. So go ahead, and I want to see if you can get that substituted in. See if you can get the little formula written out. I'll give you a second to do that, given what you have. Now, whether you put the 22 or the 11.5 first, it doesn't matter. But hopefully yours matches mine. What did you do? Oh, yes, it helps when you use the right numbers. There's no room for creativity. All right, so anybody having confusion about how to type that or how to write it out? Kind of? Okay, what did you get? Okay, good. So to the nearest tenth, that means that x equals 24.5. Okay, now, I called it x. You could have called it c. We could have called it anything. But did the question ask me to find x? No, it says find the length of AB, right? Which is what I labeled as x. But if I just finish here, like, what is x? I don't know. So I'd have to say that that is the length of the, equal to the length of AB. It's fine that you called it x. We could have left it as AB, even if you wanted to, but just make sure that you actually answer the question in the end. Okay? Everybody okay with that? Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter how you draw your picture, right?
No. No, and it's not even to scale, and it doesn't matter. Drawing them to scale sometimes makes it harder to write your numbers in there, especially if it's like long and skinny. So most of mine, either all my right triangles look isosceles, and all my triangles like this usually look almost equilateral, just because it's easier to label, and that's fine. And if you feel like it confuses you in a certain situation, then you could redraw it, but most of the time it doesn't matter. As long as it's labeled right, you're good. Any questions? All right, let's look at number 4. Number 4, it says find each angle measure. Okay, so we've been finding the sides, we need to find the angles. Now, there is a different version of the, well, it's the same formula, but a different way to write the law of cosines to where the angle is by itself outside, but that's just another formula you have to understand. I really think that the best way to do any of this is to use one formula and just know how to manipulate it. That way you don't have 1,000 formulas you have to know. So we're going to use the exact same formula. The difference is here, I'm looking for the angle, right? So remember, the angle that's in there corresponds to the number that goes on the outside of the equal sign. So we're still setting it up the same way. I'm going to take the number that's on the outside here, which is 10, and it's not what I'm looking for, and it's squared. That's equal to the other two sides squared and added together, so 13 squared plus 11 squared minus 2 times 13 times 11 times the cosine of x. Okay, so this time I don't get to just type it all in one step. I can type it in kind of multiple steps, but and you can do it a few different ways. I would do this in steps, and I'll show you on the calculator. You don't necessarily have to write anything down, but I also don't want to lose you in any of this. So you're going to have to make sure you have that written down, because I'm about to show you my calculator, and I'm not going to put that back up there. This is all you have to have written. So let's look at what we would do in the calculator for that. I would take that 10, and I'm going to square it. Now my goal is to get x by itself, right? So looking at your equation, what's the first things we can move? Okay, well, I'm trying to get, well, let's just talk about this first here. I'm trying to get this by itself, right? I'm trying to isolate this. So I want to subtract both of these, right? So maybe for this one time, this isn't stuff you necessarily have to write down, but I'm going to write it on here so I don't lose you. You might want to write it on your notes, but again, you don't necessarily have to show the work. In my calculator, I don't care what 10 squared even is, even though it's easy. I'm going to take 10 squared, I'm going to subtract the 13 squared, and I'm going to subtract the 11 squared, right? So now that leaves you with negative 2 times 13 times 11 times the cosine of x. Everybody with me so far? Okay, so all I did was literally subtract both of those, yes? So, and the calculator will do all of that. After I do that, then I'm still trying to get x by itself, so I need to divide by that stuff right there, right? So I'm going to divide this by negative 2 times 13 times 11. Divide that by negative 2 times 13 times, times 11. So that these cancel out, right? And all of that right there is going to equal to cosine of x. So since these calculators do the fractions, you can put that in the fraction exactly like you see it, right? So let's do that. That's probably the best way to do it anyway. So I'm going to go back up here. I've already typed in 10 squared, but since I've only typed in one thing, I can hit my fraction bar and it ends up there, or we can just start from scratch. So there's my fraction. So in my numerator, I'm going to have that 10 squared minus 13 squared minus 11 squared. Then that all gets divided by negative 2 times 13 times 11. It's right above recall. I know, I got that question. I get that question a lot. Do you find it? It's right below the fraction. I know, these are pretty, but let me tell you guys, somebody said was going to go and order one, and these were, when I bought it in May, it was $8.99. When I bought these before Christmas, they were $12.99. Now on Amazon, they are $16.99. I know, I guess. It's like supply and demand. But they are worth it. Even at $16.99, I think they're worth it. But everybody with me? Does this make sense from what we had? Okay, so I'm going to hit equals. Okay, so it gives me a fraction. But either way, whether I have the fraction, do you remember how to get the decimal if you need it? The SD? Okay, but does that look like our answer? No. What does this number represent? The cosine of x. Do I want the cosine of x? No, I want x. So what do I do? Cosine inverse. Very good. So we do shift cosine, and then I just hit answer, and it'll use that answer that I had, and then bam, there's my angle.
Before you started,
Mm-hmm.
I would have thought that like I got this by myself, and I would have thought that you just.
Oh, you could have done that too. Yeah. Yeah, even here, you could have typed it in all at once and taken the, have x equal the cosine inverse of all of that stuff. Like plug all that in there. That's fine. And then you can do it all in one step. Either way. Or what I was going to show, what I would do, because I'm a little lazy with that whole fraction bar, I'll just show you what I actually would have done in the calculator, because I wouldn't have done it that way, but I was afraid I was going to lose you. I would have taken 10 squared and subtracted 13 squared and then subtracted 11 squared, right? And then press enter. Then I'm going to divide that by, and then I open my parentheses, negative 2 times, oops, oh crap, times 13 times 11. And then that gives me that. Then I would have taken the cosine inverse. It's probably more button pushing, but then I don't have to worry about the fractions or whatever. It's the same thing. So whatever you feel the most comfortable with, as long as you're doing the right steps, you're good. No. Because, okay, let me make sure I understand your question. So from right here, you're saying, could you have just divided both sides by the cosine of x? Okay, so if you do that, first of all, it ends up in the denominator over here, which you don't want. And second of all, you'd have to divide this by it also, because this is an all multiplication. Okay, and here's also what you don't do, because this is what happened a lot when people weren't typing them in the same way. Like, I don't care how you type it in as long as you do the right thing. Here's what you don't do. This does not equal 10 squared. Okay, so 10 squared is 100, right? And then people would take that 13 squared plus 11 squared minus 2 times 13 times 11 and get a number, whatever number that is, and then have like that negative number times the cosine of x. Like, that's a big fat no-no, right? Because this doesn't have a cosine on it and this doesn't have a cosine on it, but this does, so they're not like terms, right? So you can't subtract this stuff from here at this point because it's connected to that. That's why you have to divide first. And I think y'all know those things. That's just weird things that happen sometimes. Okay, we good with that? Questions? All right, we're going to do another one so we can make sure we get this. All right, let's do number 6. Because we're not doing the word problems we're doing tomorrow. We're doing them in a totally separate lesson because we have to talk about some terminology. Okay, once it turns the page. Come on. All right, here we go. So number 6. So we're going to draw our picture. Picture time. RST. RS is 9 centimeters. ST is 14 centimeters. RT is 6 centimeters. Okay. And I want to find the measure of angle R. So I'm looking for that angle. Since I am looking for the measure of angle R, what number goes by itself on the left? 14 squared. Okay, good. So that's 14 squared equals, and then see if you can get the rest written out, and then I'll write it up there, and then I'll let you type it in and see if we can get all that typed in. Okay, y'all agree with that? And once you get it written down, then double check that. And remember, it doesn't matter if 6 or 9 goes first. That's just, okay. And then if you're good with that and you don't have any questions, go ahead and see if you can get that typed in. You can write stuff out if that helps you to write it out first. Hmm? Well, I could have, yeah, but I didn't want to lose anybody on that. But once you get all that over there, that's the cosine of R. So you can type this in and then take the cosine inverse, or you can take the cosine inverse as you do it. It's up to you. Some people don't like to type everything in at once. That's just like too much, and then other people like to do that. So it's totally up to you. Right, but I think it did tell us. Yeah, there's 10. Okay. All right, I got this. All right, are we doing okay? Yes. Okay. You don't necessarily have to write that. No, what I have in purple is the only thing you have to have. So if you just type it in from there, that's fine. But that's your setup, like where it's coming from. It's not just being pulled out of the sky and then the calculate. That's fine. Some people need to write that down before they type it in, like it makes them feel better. That's, or makes it make more sense. That's absolutely fine. All right. Good. Yes. Yes. Very good. So the measure of angle R is equal to 137.0 degrees because it said to the nearest tenth, and we got to know that it's not exactly 137. Okay? Everybody good? Let me know if you have questions, if you can't get that. If you didn't get it, try it again. Always double check you're in degrees too, that nobody's messed with your calculator even by accident. I'm not saying everybody's evil, but okay. Some people are, so you know. There's no square root. No. When we're looking for. Well, because that's what we did on the first, on these, you had to, because yeah. So no square root on that one. Okay, yeah, so make sure you can get the number. All right, anything else? We're good? All right, so you might not want to glue or tape this in because we're going to finish it tomorrow. It's up to you. Sometimes it's harder to write in. We're going to do those tomorrow because we need to talk about some other terminology. Yes, I know. You want me to prolong it today so that you don't have to take your test. You're going to have to take it.